What's up YouTube, Superboss TCG here, and it has been a hot minute since I've uploaded on this channel. And that's largely because for a few years I kind of fell out of TCGs, lacking mostly time and money to play. But now that I'm back to playing my favorite three, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's made me want to restart this channel. So, for my first video back, I decided to start at the basics and do a how to play series for those three. And here I am starting with Magic the Gathering, the one I've been playing for the longest. Now, I'm going to avoid going into how and when I started playing because this is going to be a long video as it is. And I want to save some time for myself in the arduous process that is going to be scripting and editing this behemoth. So without wasting any more time, let's get right into it. Alright, so I'm going to start with the basics and get more in depth as I go along. Timestamps will be in the description for each section so you can reference them as needed. Section 1, the anatomy of a card. So here is a picture of a standard Magic card. What you'll need to know is right here at the top left is the card's name. That will obviously tell you what the card is called. For this example, we have Sky Swirl Harrier. Over here on the top right, you can see the gray 4 with the small white sun symbol next to it. This is the card's mana cost. This should be read as the card costing 5 total mana. 4 mana of any type, sometimes referred to as generic mana, and 1 specifically white. I will go more into what mana is and how to get it in a later section. Now, just below the card art in the middle here is the type line. There you will find the super type and subtype. The super type tells you what kind of card it is, and the subtype will further divide it. More on that in the next section. Over on the right here is the set symbol that will tell you the set the card came from and its rarity. Black, like this one, means common. Silver means uncommon, gold means rare, and this copper color means mythic rare. Just under that is the text box that will contain any abilities the card may have, and sometimes the flavor text like you see here. Flavor text has no bearing on the card and just seeks to provide some context on the card itself or some kind of insight into the lore of the game. Now down here at the bottom you'll notice the box with the 3/4. Only creatures will have that box, and on the left is the creature's power and on the right is the toughness. Its power is how much damage it deals, and its toughness is how much it can take before dying. Section 2, Card Types. So going back to what I was saying in regard to card types, there are currently 8 card types in Magic. Creatures, enchantments, artifacts, lands, instants, sorceries, planeswalkers, and battles. I'll start with creatures, they're some of the easiest to understand. Creatures are monsters that you can summon to beat your opponent into submission with. They can attack your opponent and sometimes have abilities to help you or hinder others. More on that in the combat section. They have a subtype like I mentioned earlier, and in this case it describes what kind of creature it is. Like the Harrier here is a bird. This Herald of the Fair is a human, this Unraveling Mummy is a zombie, and so on and so forth. Next up is enchantments. They have abilities that are either always active or you need to activate. Like the one I'm showing on screen is a classic that gives all of your creatures +1 power and toughness. Abilities of enchantments will only last as long as they are on the battlefield. You may see an enchantment that has the subtype Aura. This means that the enchantment can only exist if it's attached to a creature, and will usually grant that creature some kind of bonus. Like the Oaken form I just put on screen that simply gives the creature it's attached to +3 to both its power and toughness. Next up is artifacts. Artifacts are very similar to enchantments, but usually will need to have their abilities activated and usually don't have a color. The card I just put on screen, for example, lets you search your library, that's what the game refers to the deck as, for a basic land card and put it into your hand. Now you may also encounter the subtype called equipment. Equipment is similar to an aura in so much as it gets its use by being attached to a creature. Unlike auras, however, they can exist on the battlefield when not on a creature. This number down here is the equip cost and is how much mana you have to pay to attach it. Next are lands. There are 5 basic land types, each corresponding to one of the 5 colors of magic. Plains for white, island for blue, swamp for black, mountain for red, and forest for green. Unlike other types of cards that can only have a limit of 4 cards with the same name in your deck, you can have any number of basic lands in your deck. You can only play 1 land per turn, and each land can only produce 1 mana per turn. I'll elaborate more on this during the phases of turn section. There are also lands that aren't basic, and will usually have some kind of other ability or advantage, but those adhere to the rule of 4 I mentioned previously. Next are sorceries. They are one-time use spells that have an effect and go to the graveyard immediately. Do not pass go and do not collect $200. That joke was awful and I'm sorry. The drawback, however, is that they can only be used on your turn. Instants are the same as sorceries, except they can be used anytime. During your turn, during your opponent's turn, whenever. Now the next two, Planeswalkers and Battles, are a little convoluted, so I'll do my best to explain as simply as possible. Planeswalkers are unlike other cards in their design, but function similarly to an enchantment but with an HP pool. This pool is called Loyalty, and the card will come in with a predetermined amount of loyalty, seen in this number on the bottom. These numbers here are Planeswalker's loyalty abilities. To use these abilities, you have to add loyalty to it as shown by this +1. As a result of giving Ajani Goldmane here +1 loyalty, you gain 2 life. He also has a -1 and a -6. This means he will lose that much loyalty. When a Planeswalker drops to 0 loyalty, they die. You also can't take away more loyalty than the Planeswalker has to use their ability. I.e., if Ajani here has 5 loyalty, you cannot then use his -6 ability because he doesn't have enough loyalty. You can, however, use exact amounts. If Ajani has 6 loyalty, you can use the -6. It will result in Ajani dying, but you will get the use of the ability. You can only use each Planeswalker's ability once per turn. Your opponent can try and stop your Planeswalker from gaining loyalty by dealing damage to it. When a Planeswalker is dealt damage, they lose that much loyalty. More on that during the combat section. Now you may notice right here is a word I haven't talked about yet. Legendary. Legendary is a super type that modifies another super type. What legendary means is that you can only have 1 card of the same name on the battlefield at a time. For example, if I had this legendary creature on the battlefield, if I were to play another copy of this card, I would have to immediately sacrifice one and send it to the graveyard, because 2 of the same legendary card cannot exist at the same time, as that would naturally cause some kind of time paradox and collapse the universe as we know it. Finally, last up for card types is Battles. Battles are the newest card type, being released in the newest set at time of recording, March of the Machine. Battles have the subtype Siege, and when you play them, they get put under the control of an opponent, but you get its ability, not your opponent. In this example, you are the one getting the land. While it's on your opponent's side of the field, they have to protect it while you trying to destroy it. You destroy it by dealing damage to it until this number reaches 0. When it does, it leaves the battlefield and transforms, and then comes back to the battlefield under your control. In this example, once you deal 3 damage to this battle, it leaves play, then comes back to your side on the field, flipped over onto the back into this creature. Section 3. How to get and use mana. Mana is the backbone of the game, and you need it to cast any spell. Importantly, in this game, any card that isn't a land is a spell. Your primary way of getting mana will be your basic lands. Once you have land on the battlefield, tapping the land, or turning it sideways, will add 1 mana of the type that land produces to an imaginary zone called your mana pool. In this example, tapping this forest will add 1 green mana to your mana pool. If the land is a non-basic land, like this Colony Garden, it will specify what type of mana it produces. Other things like creatures and artifacts can also be used to gain mana, like this Gruul Locket and this Llanowar Elves. You also need to tap them to gain their effects, as noted by this symbol here. Now, if we go back to our first example of Sky-Swirl Harrier, it costs a total of 5 mana. 4 of it can be any color, but at least 1 needs to be white. In the Llanowar Elves example, you only need 1 mana and it needs to be green. In the Gruul Locket example, the 3 mana can be of any color. It is all generic. If, however, you see something like this Soul Ring, you may notice this symbol. This is actually the 6th type of mana, colorless mana. I didn't mention it before because needing specifically colorless mana is rare and only really seen on one type of card. But otherwise, colorless mana can be spent to cover the cost of generic mana. Like in the Gruul Locket example, you could pay for this with 3 colorless mana. Section 4. Starting a game. In a typical 1v1 game, you'll need a deck of no less than 60 cards. You can use more than 60, but generally speaking, your deck should have 60 cards. I won't go into advanced deck building strategy in this video, but you should have roughly 2/3 spells and 1/3 land. Each player starts with 20 life, and the first person to drop to 0 loses. You'll begin the game by drawing a starting hand of 7 cards. If you don't like your hand, you can then choose to mulligan, shuffling your hand back into your deck, then drawing a new hand of 7 cards. Beware, however, if you mulligan, you'll need to put one of those cards on the bottom of your deck for each time you mulligan. For example, I draw 7 cards. I don't like it, and I mulligan 3 times to get a new hand. Once I decide to keep, I have to put 3 cards from my hand on the bottom of my deck, effectively starting the game with 4 cards in hand. A good rule of thumb is to mulligan if you have too many or too few lands in your opening hand. You should generally have about 2 to 3 lands in your opening hand. Section 5. Phases of a turn. Okay, so you and your opponent have both drawn a starting hand and both of you have kept your starting hands. What happens next? There are a few phases of a turn that are broken down into steps. The first phase is the beginning phase. This phase is broken down into 3 steps that happen in this order: untap, upkeep, draw. During the untap step, any cards on your side of the field that were tapped become untapped. Nothing happens during the upkeep unless a card specifies that something does. The draw step is when you draw your 1 card for the turn. If you are going first, you skip your first draw step. The next phase to happen is the main phase. During the main phase is when a bulk of the game actually happens. During the main phase, you can play lands, cast spells, activate abilities, and so on. Alright, I was kind of dreading this because it's a little complex, but I'll do my best to explain, because now I have to talk about the stack. So whenever you cast a spell or activate an ability, it goes to a zone called the stack. If it helps, imagine making a physical stack of cards. Cards leave the stack and resolve in reverse order of entering. Last in, first out. Let's make an example on screen. Your opponent has 2 life left and you want to win, so you cast Direct Current to deal 2 damage straight to their face. Your opponent decides they don't want to lose, so they cast Angel's Mercy in response to your Direct Current. You still want to win, so you put Counterspell to stop their Angel's Mercy. The first spell to resolve would be Counterspell. As a result, Angel's Mercy is removed from the stack without resolving and sent to the graveyard because it's countered. Your Direct Current then resolves, and you win. Congrats! Now it's important to note that only instant spells can be put on the stack after another spell or ability. For example, if my opponent casts Bargain, I can't respond with another sorcery or creature spell. Most abilities can be activated any time, like Instants, and thus can be put on the stack in response to other spells or abilities. If they can't be activated any time, the card will typically specify. Planeswalker abilities, for example, can only be used during your main phase and only when the stack is empty. Same with sorceries. Sorceries can only be played during your main phase and only when the stack is empty. After the main phase is the combat phase. The steps in order are beginning of combat, declare attackers, declare blockers, damage, and end combat. The beginning of combat step is like an upkeep for combat. Usually nothing happens, but sometimes a card will have a beginning of combat effect. The next step is to declare attackers. During this step, you have to declare which creatures will be attacking. You have to declare them all at once. To declare a creature as an attacker, you must tap it. If your opponent has a Planeswalker, you can choose to attack the Planeswalker instead of your opponent, but otherwise you must attack your opponent. You cannot attack creatures directly like you would in Yu-Gi-Oh! Important to note that creatures can't attack or activate abilities requiring to tap the turn they are played. This is called summoning sickness. Next up is to declare blockers. The defender can choose any of your creatures to block, and can block each creature with any number of creatures. For example, if you attack with one 3/4 creature, remember that's 3 power and 4 toughness, your opponent can block with two 2/2 creatures to deal 4 damage to it and kill it. The attacker chooses how their creatures assign damage. In this scenario, you only have enough power to kill one of their creatures. So you choose which 2/2 to kill, and the other one takes 1 damage, reducing their toughness to 1 for the rest of the turn. Any damage dealt to a creature from any source lasts until the end of the turn. Next is the damage step when combat resolves and damage is dealt as necessary. The end combat step is when all creatures involved in combat officially leave combat and are no longer considered attacking or blocking. I'll now do a lightning round, quickly explaining a few common creature abilities and how they work. These are known as keyword abilities because they have been printed on so many cards that the actual text has been reduced to a keyword that implies the full text box. Flying. Creatures with flying can only be blocked by their creatures with flying. Reach. You can block creatures with flying. Trample. Any damage that is dealt more than a creature's toughness is dealt to that creature's controller. For example, if you have a 5/5 and your opponent blocks with a 3/3, you deal 3 damage to the 3/3 and the other 2 get sent through to your opponent. Lifelink. When a creature with lifelink deals damage, you gain that much life. Death Touch. Any amount of damage a creature with Death Touch deals is enough to be considered lethal to that creature. For example, if this 10/10 attacks and is blocked by this 1/1 Death Touch, they both die because the 1/1 Death Touch can kill the 10/10. Indestructible. A creature with indestructible cannot be destroyed by any means. Hexproof. Hexproof means that the creature cannot be targeted by spells or abilities. Haste. Creatures with haste are unaffected by summoning sickness. After combat ends, there is another main phase for you to cast spells and use abilities. Usually referred to as the post-combat main phase 2, or second main phase. After the second main phase, there is the end phase. The end phase consists of the end step and the cleanup step. The end step is the last opportunity players have to take any game actions before the next turn. Effects that say until the beginning of the end step will fall away, and sometimes abilities will trigger. The cleanup step is when all damage on creatures goes away until end of turn abilities fall away, and if you have more cards in hand than maximum hand size, usually 7, this is when you discard to maximum hand size. Example, if I have 9 cards in hand, I would need to discard 2 to reach 7. And that's how a typical turn goes. You just repeat this process until someone loses the game. I'll now kick it over to myself, doing a game against the AI on Arena to show you how a typical turn will go. Alright, so here we are in a game that I'm going to use to show you how the game is played. Now this, I suppose I'll mulligan that. Yeah, see, that's a little bit better. So because of this, I'm going to have to choose something to send back to my deck because I mulliganed once, so I get to keep 6. And I think I will send this bristling boar back because I want to keep the Galta because it's absolutely massive, and I should be able to get some use out of it. But my opponent's playing white. So, this is, I was not actually anticipating this snowland thing. These are basic lands, and, they just, there's nothing inherently special about them, it still just taps for 1 green. So now that I've got 2 mana, I can cast this Druid of the Cowl, which costs 2 mana, by tapping my lands and setting it out. Don't know why I didn't play that last turn, I'm guessing it They've just, now that I've got 3, I can play the Centaur Courser, which costs 3. And you may actually be noticing this number go down on this one. That's because this spell costs less to cast, where X is the total power among creatures you control. And because I control 4 power worth of creatures, it costs 4 less, so right now it costs 8 instead of 12. Now I'm going to go to combat, but choose not to attack. No, I think that will be the end of my turn. Alright, so that's a good, good seer of the aura there. Because it was put on the Shrine Keeper, and because of it, the Shrine Keeper is a 4/4, and I can no longer block without one of my creatures dying. So I will actually just choose to take the damage here, because I do have an out to that. Not just that, either. Oop. Snow-covered forest. Now I can cast Blizzard Brawl, which lets me choose a creature I control, the Centaur Courser, and a creature my opponent controls, their Shrine Keeper. And because I control 4 snowlands, it will get +1/+0, so it'll become a 4/3 with Indestructible, so it won't be able to be destroyed, and then they'll fight each other. What that means is that they will both deal damage to the other one. Quiet you. They will both deal damage to the other one equal to its power. So my Centaur Courser will deal 4 damage to the Shrine Keeper, destroying it. The Shrine Keeper will deal 4 damage to my Centaur Courser, but it won't be destroyed because it's got Indestructible and can't be destroyed. And now, going to combat, I can safely swing in for 5 damage. And that will be the end of my turn. Right. Put out Greenwood Sentinel. So I don't think I went over Vigilance in my common abilities section, though I should have. Vigilance means it doesn't need to tap to attack. Makes it a great defensive option. Now, because my Centaur Courser is bigger than the Impassioned Orator, I'm going to attack with it to deal some damage. They're going to block, and I'll pass to damage. Aha! And here is a perfect example of how to use the stack. So, before damage was dealt, Sparky cast Tactical Advantage to give it +2/+2. Now, normally that would mean, uh-oh, the Impassioned Orator is now a 4/4 and my Centaur Courser is going to die. Unfortunately, but now, because this Titanic Growth is an instant, I can put it on this stack ahead of that Tactical Advantage, targeting my Centaur Courser, meaning it's going to become a 7/7, then that's going to become a 4/4, and so my Centaur Courser survives. And now I have a Bristling Boar. It can only be blocked by 1 creature. That's a 3/4, so I can't profitably attack with any of my creatures yet. So I am going to call that nothing. But now you see, I've got enough power on the I'll take the 3. But now you see, I've got enough power on the board that Gulta Primal Hunger, despite being a 12/12 with Trample, now only costs 2 mana.
Super awesome.
So for only 2 mana, I've just now put a 12/12 dinosaur on the field. Now you see, it has that legendary super type I mentioned, so if I drew another Gulta, I could not put it on the battlefield because one of them would die. Now, because I've got this extra, will you be quiet? Now, because I've got 3 mana left over, I can put this Blanchwood armor on, say, this Bristling Boar, because it's an aura, and it gives it +1/+1 for each forest I control, which would be 4. So it's giving it +4/+4, making it an 8/7. And all of my creatures can profitably attack because he has no blockers. Now I'm just going to take the 3 damage, because on this turn I easily win because I've got 1, 4, 6, 18, 26 power on board. So I'm just gonna hit the all attack button, which is colloquial sometimes referred to as flunging, with all of my monsters for an easy victory. Now, I hope that was educational in how a typical game of Magic the Gathering will go. If you have any more questions on the subject, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Until next time, this is Superboss TCG, signing out.